Nowruz, the Persian New Year which always falls on the vernal or spring equinox, is a holiday that's celebrated by people of many different ethnicities, nationalities, and religions. However, it's an especially important holiday for those in the Persian and Kurdish world. Both of these latter two groups share a great deal in common, including an ancestry that goes back thousands of years. The majority of modern Iranians identify themselves as being ethnically Persian, and by extension the descendants of the ancient Persian people who ruled several empires, starting with Cyrus the Great in the 550s BCE. Most modern Kurds claim to be the ancestors of the ancient people known as the Medes. In honor of Nowruz, which is important to both, I wanted to show you how related these peoples were, even in ancient times. We'll take a quick look at the stories of three notable kings who, without, the histories of both the Persians and the Kurds may have been very different. Between the 9th and 7th centuries BCE, the undisputed power in the ancient Near East was the expansionist Assyrian Empire. It was moving in all directions of the compass. To its west were the Zagros Mountains, and it was here that the Assyrians during the reign of Shalmaneser III first recorded encounters with tribes of people known as the Medes. As expected, the Assyrians sought to control the region, and eventually, armed conflicts broke out between the two. The Medes, who mostly fought on horseback, were an extremely tough adversary for the Assyrians. After a few decades, the two sides more or less reached an agreement whereby the Median tribes were able to keep a sort of quasi-independence as long as they served the Assyrians as vassals and provided tribute. Still, with all of the resources at the disposal of the Assyrian Empire, it would only be a matter of time until they completely subjugated the territories occupied by the Medes. It's in this environment that the Median leader Deioces, whose Old Iranian name is Dayuka, came to the fore. The only information we have about him comes from Herodotus, who writes that he was a shrewd man known for both his wisdom as well as his ability to arbitrate disputes. Recognizing that the Medes as a people were doomed unless they united together, Deioces, according to Herodotus, formed the first Median kingdom and had the settlement of Ecbatana fortified to serve as its capital. Unfortunately, Herodotus is our only source for Deioces, and likely relied on oral traditions that he heard while traveling throughout the Persian Empire in the 5th century BCE. Scholars, though, have found Assyrian texts from the 8th century BCE that do mention a certain Dayuku, but whether or not this is the same person as Herodotus' Deioces can't be determined. The next great king of Media was Cyaxares, whose real name in Old Persian is Huvakshatra. He's also mentioned in Herodotus' writings, but in addition to this, we also have Babylonian chronicles that verify his identity. He took the kingdom that his grandfather, Deioces, founded and turned it into an empire. After the death of Assyria's powerful king, Ashurbanipal, in 627 BCE, the Assyrian Empire fell into a civil war between rival claimants to the throne, which prompted many of Assyria's subjects to take advantage of the chaos and declare their independence. This included the Babylonians and the Medes. The Babylonians, under their new king, who was a Chaldean named Nabopolassar, wasted no time. In 615 BCE, he marched against the great Assyrian city of Ashur, but ultimately was unable to take it. He knew that in order to definitively defeat the Assyrians once and for all, he needed to ally with others who hated them as much as he did. For this, he found no better partner than Cyaxares of Media. Like Nabopolassar, Cyaxares had also recently kicked out any vestiges of Assyrian rule from his own land and was willing to go the distance to make sure that Media would never be threatened again. At first, the two worked independently. The Medes had to first deal with hostile Scythians, after which they marched into the Assyrian heartland, capturing many cities and towns along the way. Sometime in 614 or late 613 BCE, the Medes captured the holy Assyrian city of Ashur, which for at least 1500 years had been their primary religious and cultural center. They plundered as much as they could from Ashur and destroyed its temples before razing the entire city to the ground. Soon afterward, the main Babylonian army arrived outside the now ruined city of Ashur, where Cyaxares and Nabopolassar met in person to officially form an alliance. The two of them then marched north up the Tigris River to the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, which in those days was probably the most magnificent city in the world. After a 3-month siege, it too suffered the same fate as Ashur against the combined forces of the Medes and the Babylonians. Though remnants of the Assyrian Empire still fought on in the west, for all practical purposes, their state was finished. Cyaxares and Nabopolassar divided up the territories of the Assyrian Empire among themselves, whereby the Medes took much of the land to the north, including what was once the kingdom of Urartu, today in modern Armenia. In these latter areas, Cyaxares came in contact with the kingdom of Lydia, and from 590 to 585 BCE, the two fought against each other, though neither side could claim victory. After 5 years of fighting, the Medes and the Lydians made peace, and Cyaxares' son, Astyages, married one of the daughters of the Lydian king. Remember that name, Astyages. Alright, you knew that this king was going to be on the list, and not just because we shared the same name. Actually, his name in Old Persian is Kurush. Cyrus is what the Greeks called him, and since it's the name most people are familiar with, I'll use it here. His father was the Persian king, Cambyses I, while his mother was a Median princess named Mandani. Mandani's father, who was Cyrus's grandfather, was the Median king Astyages. There are many stories of Cyrus's birth and upbringing, most, if not all of which I'll discuss in other episodes. However, it's believed that around 559 BCE, when Cyrus was perhaps 40 years of age, he ascended the throne of Persia. At that time, the Persians were vassals of the Medes and ruled from the city of Anshan, the same city that had for centuries, if not millennia before, been one of the great centers of Elamite culture and learning. By this time, though, it was ruled by a Persian dynasty. The sources that we have implied that Astyages was not a very popular ruler. Cyrus, on the other hand, was very popular and known for his wisdom. There are several versions of what happened between them, but the most popular one, found both in Babylonian chronicles and more or less reiterated by Herodotus, is that in 554 or 553 BCE, Astyages felt threatened by Cyrus and marched on Persia, but his own army defected over to Cyrus's side and made him their king. This actually made him the ruler of both the Persians and the Medes. Totally legit, because he was a member of both royal houses. This, however, alarmed the other kingdoms in the region, especially those of Lydia and Babylon. Their alliances had been with Astyages and his Median predecessors. To them, this upstart Persian king Cyrus was a usurper, and so they went to war with Persia. Both, however, were defeated. First Lydia and its king Croesus, and then Babylon and its king Nabonidus. In both of these instances, Cyrus treated his defeated enemies with mercy and even appointed them to high positions within his government. In fact, Cyrus introduced a rather novel concept of kingship that emphasized rule based on benevolence, persuasion, and respect for the cultural and religious values of the various peoples he had conquered. He also didn't allow his soldiers to plunder the cities that he acquired, something that was generally a given in ancient warfare. Some argue that this was simply a practical strategy for ruling over such a large swath of territory with a diverse population. Even if this was the case, the fact is that Cyrus's style of rule and leadership was different than that of nearly every other great conqueror who had come before him. And this, to be honest, is not what only separated him from most of the other kings of the past, but also set the precedent of tolerance that many, though not all, Persian kings would follow in the future. I think that's really the real reason why he's called Cyrus the Great. In the end, Most historians agree that Cyrus died a warrior's death on the battlefield against nomadic tribes on the periphery of his empire, most likely the areas that make up the modern nations of Turkmenistan or the southern part of Uzbekistan. So, these are just 3 ancient kings who were important in shaping the common history of both the Persians and the Medes. We'll talk more about these and other kings in future programs, especially in a few podcast episodes that I have lined up for you. Stay tuned. Once again, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. If you learned something or just enjoyed the video, please don't hesitate to smash that like button. Also, consider subscribing if you haven't already. You can also check out History with Cy on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and find more great content on the podcast edition of the show. Thanks again, stay safe, and I'll catch you in the next episode.